All righty. Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to have such a full classroom. Last week, it was me and Rebecca. No, Rebecca. Everybody's got a lot going on. So I've got a couple details we're going to go over again today. What the topic is details of the transaction. Now, when we walk through a transaction, there's someone who's never done a transaction before. It can kind of seem overwhelming. Yes?
Century 21 preferred.
And for someone who has a transaction, we
sure, yeah. I'll walk over there right now. Thanks.
There's quite a bit going on in that transaction. Every transaction is unique. You're not going to see one that's the same as the one that came before it, right? They all have a different sort of a wrinkle to them. Now, Felipe covered a couple of things yesterday, and I'm just going to touch on a couple of those in regard to the details. That's where, and we'll look at 3 examples later today in our training of where it can cost you, it can cost your seller, or it can cost your buyer. And what we don't want to, we never want to lose any money, right? Because how many of us are okay with losing, I don't know, $500 or $5,000 on a transaction? No? Okay, so I've shared this before. Maybe there's someone here that are new that haven't heard this story. So I've been in the industry for 6 years now. So this was, I want to say, year 2. Now on the purchase agreement, on page, no, it's page 3. Yeah, page 3. I've highlighted this, so everybody has this in your inbox. Okay, I've went through and highlighted the boxes because the boxes are the details. Those are the things that we sometimes miss. All right. And it says on there, on paragraph 7D10, blank shall pay for the cost not to exceed of a home warranty. And there's 2 boxes to check. There's a buyer and there's a seller box. Okay. So we as the agents, we're having a conversation with our clients, get to determine who's going to pay for what. Yes? Or we're going to ask. I didn't check that box. I left it blank. Buyer and seller. There was a home warranty that was ordered $450. Okay? At the close of escrow, my buyer ended up paying for the home warranty. How did that happen? Because I didn't choose, right?
Yeah, it was left out.
It was left out, but somehow my buyer ended up paying for it. Why do you think that happened?
If you paid for it?
Well, at this point, my buyers paid for it, right? Well, escrow actually, in and of themselves, determined who was going to pay for it. They never called me. I guess maybe they spoke to the seller side because I represented the buyer. And then my buyer said, what is this? So then what did I have to do as an agent? I paid for that, $450, simply because the box was not checked. Small detail. I mentioned this yesterday when I was talking about our training today. Your real estate exam to get your license is a reading test. That's all it is. Paying attention to the details is how you pass that. They put things into the verbiage slightly just so you kind of, is that really what I think? Yes or no, right? When you pay attention to the details, it doesn't cost you money because you've already got your splits, right? You've got taxes that you got to pay. You have expenses that come out of this. So the last thing you want to do is fork over hundreds of dollars. We're not talking about $50. Has anyone else had an experience where maybe you, in your transactions, have maybe missed a detail and it cost you? Okay, share with us.
You too, Jennifer? Oh, no. Well, me, real quick, it was one of my first transactions, and it was, I didn't see on the RPA where it says washer and dryer to convey or whatever to go with the transaction. So I had to pay, I think it was $1,200 and something. It was a tough lesson that I just didn't know. I had no idea. And so basically I didn't make any money in that transaction. So it was like one of my first deals. But yeah, $1,200.
$1,200.
Washer and dryer.
Washer and dryer. Did you ever miss that again?
No.
Never. Right? Jennifer, you said you had an experience?
Yes, also a washer and dryer. But on the other side, I was representing the buyer and the MLS said to include the washer and dryer. However, I did not ask for it on the purchase agreement because it said that on the MLS. And of course, I've since learned that doesn't matter what it's saying. Yeah. So lo and behold, the sellers sold the washer and dryer to an outside party. And then the buyer showed up for our closing and there was no washer or dryer. So I also bought a washer and dryer.
Washer and dryer. Yep. So maybe some of us who are a little bit new, who haven't had that take place, lessons that we can all learn. Anyone online who's watching, do you have any experience that you can share with us of maybe how you've learned a lesson the hard way, or where you paid attention and you protected yourself and your client?
I just typed in there that whatever it says on the MLS, that does not replace the contract itself, because that's one of the first lessons you experience as a new agent is you'll look at a property on the MLS, like Jennifer says, and it says, you know, hey, the jungle gym and the washer and dryer included in the sale. And so you just assume like, cool, they're throwing that in, and you don't write it into the contract. It doesn't matter if it says it on the MLS. So that's something that we learned the hard way, for sure. For sure.
Same thing if there's something on the property that your buyers don't want, that you put excludes. Like there's some broken down shed on the side of the house and they're like, I don't want that and I don't want to deal with that after closing. Make sure you specifically put excludes and that the seller's going to be removing the shed prior to closing. So it can work both ways.
Like an old mobile home.
Yeah.
I drug out it was kind of raggedy. It wasn't super heavy, but a pool table one time out of a garage. And just drug it on the curb and just put free because it had to go, right? It was gone. You know, luckily it went away. But these are the things that we have to do. Paying attention to the details. So there's 3 steps really in the details. In a contract, there's the start, there's the during, or the process, and then there's closing. All right? So we think about it in 3s like that. All of you have or should have these items right here. Now, those of us who are in the room, you can go around. These have been emailed out to us. It's contract to close, buyer and seller. These are really proprietary to one document. These are really proprietary to us at Century 21 Preferred. We've made a checklist of all the steps for a standard transaction. All right? I just made those for us to kind of take a peek at. We don't know, again, those have been emailed to you. If you don't have a copy of those, please reach out to Amber. She'll be able to get those for you. But it just takes down step by step what you need to do because there's so much that takes place in there. The contract to close with the seller is a 3-page document. For the buyer, it's a 2-page document. So when you think about all that's going to take place, how am I going to remember that? When you have a checkbox and you check the boxes and you go down, it's amazing how much more efficient you can be and how better of a job you can do serving your clients. So we start with that contract to close. Now, we talked about this, and because there's new agents here, we have to kind of cover this for everybody over and over again. This is actually page 5 of all the documents that come out for your purchase agreement. It's the wire fraud advisory. Now, this is an important detail because it is still quite prevalent today where people are losing money, buyers and sellers, because they're wiring money to someone who fraudulently sent them an email. So please, we cannot stress enough. Make sure you contact your clients and never have them send any money without first calling and speaking to escrow first. This may happen to you. Again, attention to detail. This happened to me. Escrow sent me and said, here are the wire instructions for you to give to your client. So what did I do? I emailed escrow and said, you send those to my client. Because if you send it to me and then I send it to my client and something happens, I'm the party that's liable. Small details like that, you want to just push it over to escrow, let them handle it, because the last thing you want is for someone to lose $5,000, $500,000, $5 million. It happens.
I think the hardest part as a new agent to understand is that we don't know what's our job and what escrow's job is. So the sooner you can make appointments to sit with those different services to find out what their role is in this, the better off you're going to be as a newer agent, because you wouldn't know as a new agent to tell escrow, well, that's not my job. I should not be getting wire instructions to my client. We definitely shouldn't be. No. It should be coming directly from escrow. But just definitely make an appointment and meet with those different service providers. I think it definitely benefits your business.
It's huge. And we will have, I know we've had escrow come in and they spoke to us at a sales meeting. In the past, we've had escrow come in and actually teach a class on what does escrow do? And we can do that again as well, especially for some of our newer agents. What is their process? Because if you've never bought or sold a home before and you have your real estate license, I don't know what's going on. My client starts asking me questions and I don't have those, right? But that's what this training is all going to be for you guys. We'll bring that in the future, okay? So as I went through here, I'm going to put this on the screen, and I really just went through and highlighted all of the, throw it up on the screen for you guys real quick. All the check boxes that I could find. All the check boxes, okay? And I'm just going to go over this for those of you in the room. If you're, I can pass this around. I didn't think how I wanted to do this. I wasn't sure who was coming. You guys can look through this if you'd like to. You don't need to make copies, okay? Because all I've done is I've simply gone through and I've checked the boxes that unfortunately agents miss. It's a little box. Some of them are not always checked. As you can see here on the screen, those of you who are watching, on the first page, it's who do you represent? Those boxes there. Financing terms, there's boxes there. Again, I've just checked the boxes. What I want to bring your attention to actually is the bottom of page 1 where it says additional financing terms. On additional financing terms, in that space, you can ask for closing costs. You can ask for anything really financial in regards to the contract. You want to pay attention to that. True story. This wasn't me, but this is what I heard. I believe it's one of the trainings I went to down at the association. An agent didn't notice that in that space, it said that the seller was going to, when they were requesting the seller to pay 3% towards their closing costs. They missed it. So they closed the contract, right? Everything's right. Well, they're wrapping up, so to speak. And there's this closing cost now that's on the seller's estimated settlement statement, right? Final statement stating that they're going to pay, whatever, $400,000 home says $12,000 in closing costs. That agent is expecting that 3% they're going to make for their commissions. They made a mistake. Everybody's agreed to these terms. We're wrapping things up. The seller's like, I'm sorry, that's what you agreed to. The buyer's like, we want this house. You made a mistake. That agent didn't make any money on that transaction because they simply didn't see what was written there. So it's very important that we pay attention to those small details. You follow me on that one there? Don't miss out on your whole commission. All right.
And David, right now, it's safe to say that we're not really seeing that line filled out right now in today's market because it's so competitive that just 2 years ago, every offer had something written in there. Yeah. Every offer, seller to pay for closing costs, seller to pay $1,000, seller to pay 3%, whatever. We don't see that anymore right now, and that's in today's market. But some of the things that, just to piggyback on what David mentioned, you want to make sure that when you do see information on there, if it's ambiguous, like if it says a percentage amount, well, do the math. Because if they're saying seller to pay 3% of closing costs, 3% of the closing costs or 3% of the purchase, like you got to make sure it's clear and concise what they're asking for, right? So 3% of the purchase price. Well, what if the appraisal comes in lower and they adjust the sales price? Does that also drop the 3%? You know, there's a lot of different variables. Just be mindful. Anytime you see something that's being asked for, make sure it's specific. In my opinion,
I've seen some stuff where the buyer on this contract is willing to pay more above appraisal, and I've seen it written in there recently.
And that's true. So again, another finance term, right?
You can put that there, and then of course also if you go over to page 2 where there's other terms, you'll notice in the middle of page 2 where it says other terms. I've highlighted that for you as well. It can be written there. So make sure that you're not missing anything that's added to the contract, because you as the agent ultimately are the one that's going to be responsible, going to come after. All right. So talking about what we're seeing on page 2 right now. Now there was an agent that came into the office and they're writing an offer for a property, right? And this is a relatively newer agent, and so they're not totally familiar with everything that goes there. And so they were purchasing property that had acreage. That acreage was on a septic system. Okay, well, they wrote a purchase contract. They got the purchase contract accepted, but there is a box for you to check that says septic well property monument. This is a small detail. Now, the agent and I were having a conversation and said that, well, it's a septic. They said it's okay. It's working fine. And I said, well, okay. But you don't have a certification that actually works that way. Someone's telling you that. So because you want to protect your buyer at all times, I would suggest that you go get a septic cert. So they followed our counsel and they went and got it, well, they got it inspected. Come to find out, a whole wall of the septic system was deteriorating away. It was mixing all together with the I guess, whatever happens in the septic system. And they were like, oh my goodness, I thought it was working just fine. I would have never seen it had we not got that inspection done. But see, this is a newer agent. We don't know with acreage or with the septic, there's different things that we need to be checking. All right, these small details, imagine that your client goes and closes, right? And then they call you because it's a septic issue. And then they later find out from another agent that they should have had an inspection and you didn't do that. Now, who are they coming after? Yeah. They're coming after you. Because you didn't do your job as the agent to properly guide them. And they'll win if they go to court, most likely. Right, Felipe?
Yes, it will.
Absolutely.
Any suggestion under the addenda as far as the fire hardening that should be probably listed in there?
So good question. So one thing that David hasn't covered yet is paragraph 5 of the purchase contract has a bunch of checkboxes, right? Mm-hmm. Those are all options that you can add and make a part of the contract. So by actually checking the box that says, for example, the one that he pointed out, septic, you're making that a part of the contract. In other words, my offer for my buyer is 100 grand, but I also am requesting the following contract, whatever you're going to ask for, septic certification. Mm-hmm. There's a form now for fire hardening for homes that are in a high fire hazard area. There's contracts or disclosures that we need to require for that as well. So you have an option on this paragraph 5 to add other contracts that you deem fit, because the one that Richard is mentioning is not currently on the purchase contract. But there are 2 sections for other disclosures. Mm-hmm. So that's where you would check other and add anything you want to make a part of the contract. I would probably just recommend, and again, I'm glad we have a lot of agents on the call. I would recommend personally, be cautious of how much stuff you add to the contract prior to getting your offer accepted, right? Because if I come at you with 50 different disclosures that I'm requiring or requesting as a buyer, the seller's going to get like, I'm a little bit intimidated and say, I don't want to deal with this, right? Or I don't want to agree to this right now. Because if you add it to paragraph 5, you are adding it to your requirement on your purchase agreement. Mm-hmm. Okay, if that makes sense.
And then anything that you add here, again, the lender is going to see. So remember that as well. So if you don't want a lender to see something, then you may want to leave it out of that initial purchase, and then that's something you can add later in an addendum.
Yes.
Okay. The lenders, honestly, we want them to have just what they need to get us a loan. All right.
And on that note, if you are financing, if the buyer is getting a loan and there is a septic system, they're going to require that certification to be done. They're going to need a septic certification to be done. So just be mindful of that.
And just so you know, because that's not that you see quite often, a septic search is going to run you about $500-600, about $550, I think is what that is. They've gone up now.
No, so well, an actual certification, typically you're going to want to request that the unit is pumped. It's going to be about it could be up to $1,200, $1,500.
Okay. Yeah, the last one I had was like a couple years ago.
Yeah.
$550
for the certification part.
Right.
Just the pumping itself, maybe $500 for sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Everything's more expensive now.
There's also, if you have a well, there's well search that you want to get as well. That's covered in that same portion, as well as if it's acreage again, are the corners marked? That's another portion there. You can have a surveyor come out. That's about, that's $1,200-1,500 for a surveyor to come out and check those corners. So again, small details that we have to know who we're asking to pay for this stuff before we ask for it and how much it costs, so everybody's aware of what we're actually asking for. Everybody follow me there? So you'll notice that there that I put on the screen, there's just a plethora of different boxes that can be checked for different types of transactions. Make sure that you just do your due diligence and check all of those. What we typically see often checked is allocation of cost for inspections. Now, on there, again, it's buyer and seller. All you have to do is just check the appropriate box. In this market, of course, buyers are paying for almost everything, minus maybe the NHD report, because it's statutory that the seller should pay for that. Apart from that, they're pretty much paying for almost everything. Just make sure that you put in here, again, who it's prepared by. If you're asking specifically, it could be seller's choice. If you have some more specific, put that in there. As many details as possible. Try not to miss those. I want to go over this one here because maybe you're seeing it or you're not seeing it. If you're new, you don't understand this portion. And that's going to be the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3, where it's talking about the government retrofits. You can leave that blank. I've seen it blank quite often. I've actually put it in there before. A couple of years ago, I put it in, and it was kicked back to me down in San Diego. So we want no part of that. Leave it alone. Take it out of the contract. That's going to be the low flow toilets and showers and faucets. That is not a point of sale. All right, so they don't have to be there. But if you check that box, just understand what you're asking for. Make sense?
And so it breaks it down into a couple categories. So on the bottom of page 2. You have the first section, which is regarding the CO2 and the smoke detectors and the water heaters. So just mention that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So basically, who's gonna pay and provide to make sure that the house has smoke alarm detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heaters have to be braked and strapped if they're not tankless, right? If it's an actual water heater. So that by law has to be done. That has to be done by so somebody has to do it. But everything's a negotiation. So you're just going to specify who's going to make sure that that stuff's done. So again, just have those conversations with your buyers, especially in this tough market, to say, look, you know, it is a requirement, but just out of curiosity, are you willing to pay for it if the home doesn't have a CO2 detector? Well, how much is that? Well, you find them at Lowe's for like $30. Well, now with COVID, with inflation, probably 35. But is that a deal breaker? Like, are you willing to do that yourself if need be, right? Most people will say, yeah, I don't care. That's not a problem. So then you get into the top of page 3, which is paragraph 2, which is talking about the retrofitting standards for, like you mentioned, low flow toilet, you know, but it's broken down into 2 sections. There's on the top it says 2I, and then there's another 2 checkboxes under 2II, I guess, whatever. The first line, 2I, is asking who's going to pay if there's a required report or inspection that has to be done for retrofitting. So it's almost like a termite report. Like, who's going to pay for the report? And if there's anything that needs to be done to bring it up to code, that's 2II. Who's going to pay for the repair? Okay, does that make sense? So just be mindful of that. But again, like David mentioned, most offers we're seeing those left blank, except for the first one, the end of page 2, which is your smoke detector, carbon monoxide. Okay.
To piggyback on what you're saying, Felipe, that one about the smoke detector and the carbon monoxide. In my opinion, I would still be marking seller, even though everything's negotiable, because that is including water heater bracing, smoke detectors, and carbon monoxide. And if the water heater needs to be braced, I don't want my buyer paying for that, because for some reason you fall out of escrow, we're not closed, and then I'm asking them to invest money in a house that may not end up being their home. So I think a typical seller, even in this crazy market, knows and understands that should be paid for by the seller.
I've actually turned down contracts on listings if they have the 2II, the one down below where it says they can actually come back at any time and with any government regulation. And the sellers basically, and the seller's required to fix it.
The verbiage is there. It's kind of vague, but yeah.
So basically, again, just, you know, everything's negotiable. Jennifer mentioned she still asks the seller to pay for smoke detectors, carbon monoxide. So it is common to see that, but I don't think I've ever seen a deal fall apart because the buyer or the seller weren't willing to pay for it. So, you know, 7B2 I and II is talking about the retrofitting reporting if necessary and the repairs for that reporting. So those, it's common to see them left blank, or if you ask for the seller to pay, be expecting to get countered. Okay, so just keep mindful of that.
Keep that in mind. Absolutely. The other one that I want to bring your attention to, and thank you, Felipe and Jennifer, for sharing on that, is actually this one here. Maybe you're not familiar with it. This is under other costs. I've just put a little arrow by it. I left it blank for you, actually, where it's a buyer shall pay for HOA fees, preparing other documents, other than those in Civil Code 4525. Typically, you'll leave that blank.
Yeah.
You're going to leave that blank because that's additional cost that's not necessarily needed. So when you're checking what's in an HOA, let me just check everything with this regarding an HOA. That's just going to be additional cost someone has to pay that's not necessarily needed. Right? That's the best way that I can really explain it. I've talked about that one time with escrow, and they brought it to our attention. Is it's like, hey, they're checking this box, so now we have to go through and get other fees collected that wouldn't necessarily be needed, and then who's going to pay for that? All right. So when you're checking the HOA boxes, that one there is one that you can typically leave blank. All right. Just so you know that there. Now, I want to talk about this because we've mentioned this already, how we've lost some money. And these are some critical pieces, because understand what this box means in regards to stoves. I'm on paragraph 8, stoves, refrigerators, washers and dryers. It says all stoves if you check the box. It says all refrigerators if you check the box, and all washers and dryers. Sometimes someone may have a refrigerator, just use that as an example, in the garage and one in the home. If you checked all, you're asking for all of them. Okay, so know what you're asking for. You have to take out what you don't want where it says except. All right, there's 3 on there. Have the conversation with the other agent. What's including, what are they going to give us or not give us, before you just go and check that box off. It's really good to have that conversation. You're not asking for things that are bringing a counter offer your way. Does that make sense? So again, we've already heard the stories of how that simple little box can cost us quite a sum of money. We work really hard for what we earn, so you don't want to go giving it away because we simply didn't check a box appropriately. Does that make sense? Yes. Awesome. Another one here is possession. So if we move down to paragraph 9 under possession, when you're going to take possession of a property, this is another one that you want to pay attention to. Again, small details, but important. When are they moving out? When can my buyers move in? Right? Is it closed escrow? Is it 3 days after? What is the case that it's going to be? Of course, as we go down to paragraph, well, we go to the top of page 4, then we talk about seller in possession, how long they're going to be there. Understand what you're asking for before you check the box. Have the conversation with the other side. All right? Know that, go ahead. You got something? No. Know that there's 2 different boxes in regard to seller in possession. There's an SIP, that's for 29 days or less. And then there's an RLAS for 30 days or more. Which box are you checking? What is it pertaining to? These little things right here are going to make you stand out as an agent who knows what they're doing versus the agent who doesn't. Especially in this very tough market right now, when you write an offer and you're checking the wrong box and you don't understand what you're doing, that offer's already gone. It's not even discussed. Anybody's like, this agent doesn't even know how to fill out an offer. So I'm sitting down as a listing agent with my client. They're like, if they can't fill out the offer, we can only imagine where this is going to go, and we need to get this home sold. So that offer is gone. Right? Even if you were the highest offer on the table, because the agents understand what they may be typically having to deal with, and they're just going to put it to the side. They're going to say their clients are going to understand that we don't want to go that route, right? Because no one wants to work with an agent that doesn't know what they're doing. Yep. And you don't want to do that agent's work, because that's what can tend to happen as well. Is if you have an agent that doesn't know what they're doing, maybe some of us have experienced here have had the phone call where the agent's calling you and say, what do I do here? How do I do this? And you're like, wait a minute. Are you going to pay your commission? Report to your commission? No. Not going to happen. So make sure you're working with agents that know what you're doing. You have to want to share.
So I do have something I wanted to share. So I wanted to kind of break it down this way. I wanted to say, if I don't know what I'm doing and I'm filling out a purchase contract, what's the default if I don't do anything? What happens, right? So possession is going to take place, or let's talk about closing and possession. So if I don't do anything here and I get my offer accepted some miraculous way, right? And I don't check any boxes, what is the default? What's going to happen? What's going to happen is when the loan funds, you close on the transaction. When the county records the documentation transfer from one owner to the next, you have recording confirmation. That is to me, that's closing. That means everything is done. You are now the new owner, right? But when do you get the keys to your new home? That's what I'm asking. What's the default? So if you did nothing, the default per the contract is that you're going to get possession the day of closing, which is recording confirmation, at what time? Does anybody know?
It's right there on the screen.
And on the screen, if you're on the screen there, wake up. It's actually right there on the screen. It's 6 p.m. Okay, so possession is 6 p.m. the day close of escrow, which is that's when you're supposed to get the keys, unless you check one of these boxes and say this many days after, this time of day, whatever. If you did nothing, the keys can only be given once recording confirmation is done at 6 p.m. the day of close. Okay, does that make sense? So everything else he's referring to is, what if the seller says, I want to stay in the home 3 days after close, a week after close, a month after close. I want to stay in for 6 months after closing, right? We're seeing some crazy stuff. just remind yourself that anything other than the default, which is close of escrow, 6 p.m., you're going to have to check a box or do something. And that's where you come ask for some help. Rebecca has had her hand raised for a long time.
I was like,
I wanted to say, all right, I guess we'll let her ask her question, even though they couldn't grace us.
I just have a comment. Even if it's one day, they need to get that SIP. I'm seeing that not being prepared because they're like, oh, but I marked the box on the contract, or I put it on the counter, or I put it on the addendum. They have to still have the SIP, and they're not doing that.
Yeah, great advice.
Great point.
Another comment about that is if you are writing an offer, I definitely recommend contacting the agent and asking what the seller wants in advance. Because when I'm looking at a bunch of offers and I know my seller wants an SIP for, let's say, 2 weeks, and this one has it for 2 weeks, and this one has it for 2 weeks, and this agent never called me, and they're just putting possession at close of escrow, we're kind of like, well, this one didn't give it to you. If we counter back, would they? Maybe, yes.
Great
But
advice.
this offer is already stronger. They're already telling you, hey, we'll give you 2 weeks free. They've included the SIP, so that agent looks more on the ball than the one who.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. And the one other main thing that we're running into is a lot of properties have a tenant in the home. So if I did nothing, what is supposed to happen per default? It says it right on there. If there is a renter or a tenant in the home, the default is that they're going to be out 5 days prior to close of escrow. So if that's not going to happen, that's a conversation we've got to have. And well, what are you going to do? Well, this tenant want, so we'll burn that bridge when we get there. The default is they got to be out 5 days prior to close, right? So that we can make sure that we're going to close escrow on time and that they didn't trash the place and et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So just be mindful of what is the default process. Anything other than the default, that's where things get tricky and we have to check boxes. Okay.
Excellent point. I want to say that apart from that, because I want us to look at some examples here, I'm not going to spend too much time any further on this here. We'll have an RPA class later. The seller talking about their timeframes to deliver their disclosures is defaulted to 7. The buyer is defaulted to 17. There is a box if you remove contingencies. I will bring that to your attention on page 6. If you check the box, if you're removing contingencies with the offer, there's a box that you can check. If you have a buyer who is maybe they're cash and they don't need any inspection, investors, so forth, there's a box that you can check there, and that just says, hey, as is. It already says as is in the contract. Of course, we're making it very plain. We don't have any contingencies whatsoever. We can purchase this home today. All right. So just note that that box is there, so that you can check that as well. If you scroll all the way down to the couple, again, these are just small details. We're going to get into these 3 exhibits that I've got for us to look at today. We're looking at page 8, where there's a couple extra initials that are sometimes missed. Again, little things like this show that you know what you're doing. You paid, I shouldn't say that, you paid attention to the details. And that's what it comes down to, is really paying attention to the details, making sure that all initials are on the appropriate boxes, or rather appropriate pages. And then of course, if I want to go down here, all offers are good for 3 days. I'm on the bottom of page 9. The default, as Felipe was saying, the default is 9 days, or 3 days, I'm sorry, page 9. 3 days is the default, all right? From when they have to respond, the seller has to respond. If you want to change that, recently we got one exception. We were like, you got till tonight to get back to us. So they're like, why do we have to rush? It was like, because we want the house and we're ready to move forward. You know, you can make that adjustment in there, but the default is 3 days from when you submit that offer for them to respond to you. And if you ever have someone signing on behalf of an entity, there's a box to check for them to fill out the RCSD. Check the box for the RCSD. It'll automatically populate. You'll fill that out, and it goes along with your purchase. And that's the same thing for the seller side. There's a box for you to check for that as well. I've put a little star by this one. This is the last little point that I need to bring out on the RPA today, is a box to check. Critical box to check. It says, if checked, seller acceptance is subject to the attached counter offer. If you are countering an offer and you don't check this box and you sign it, you have accepted that offer. Understand that, everybody? If you are countering an offer and you did not check the box, you are accepting the counter as is. So even if you typed up the counter offer, doesn't go together because you didn't check the appropriate box. We've seen these missed, so don't miss it on yours because you know now. All right? That's really all I have for the purchase agreement. What I really want us to look at is a couple of these exhibits that I have, and I want you guys to look at these and see if you can find the problem. There's actually 3 different problems that I have, and we've got a little team over here, so we're going to have the team in the room look at this first one, and I want us to see if we can identify the escrow error. These are going to be 3 different closing statements that I have. We as agents must be reviewing our closing statements. And I'm going to give this one in the room right here. We as a team in the room, we're going to look at it and see if we can find the error. There's a bit of documentation that's provided with you, so maybe we can huddle up together here and let's see if we can find the error that escrow missed. These are real cases that I've solved with, well, I've solved like a murder mystery or something like that, but these are real transactions that we have closed within the last 8 months, I guess it is, these 3. I want to let's see, those of you who are at home, you should have this in your inbox, so you can feel free to start looking through these. We're going to take a moment here in the room, and I want you to see if we can find the error. Now, there's more documents there, so flip through theirs, because that's just going to be your closing statement or your settlement statement. You're looking for the error that you may be able to find. We're going to do a little bit of hands-on today. Can we find the error? Can everybody read that? I blew it up as big as it would let me.
Is it on the screen?
It's on the screen. Just the settlement statement's on the screen, but I'm looking for an error here that escrow missed. They closed escrow on this one, and then I called and said, what happened here? And they said, oh, that's not our problem. So this one took us, this closed on, when did we close this one? We closed this in November, and this was just resolved last week. Okay. Now, this is where you are going to be able to shine for your clients, right? It has something to do with the room rental. Okay. So I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a hint there. There's something missing.
Is that what you're talking about, the room rental?
The room rental, it's down there in that little section is what you're looking for, where we're going to see a bit of an error. All right.
Prorated rents are on there, but there's a prepaid security deposit.
There's a prepaid security deposit, and that's credited to the buyer. Now that's right, because when you have, in this one here, we're looking at a tenant that's in place. All right. Now the tenant is going to stay. The tenant paid security deposit to the previous owner. So the previous owner can't keep that money. They have to turn that over to the new buyer. They're going to hold that money. But there's something else that was missed as well. And do you see the other one that somehow escrow missed, even though they're right on the same page on the rental agreement, maybe? Do you see the $250 for the security deposits? What do you see above that?
The homeowners.
Oh, what?
You'll see last month's rent.
Oh, well, I wasn't looking at that page.
Sorry.
So you have the rental agreement over there. Okay, so first month $525, last month's rent $525, and security deposit $250.
So you'll see on the settlement statement that the buyer was properly credited the $250, right? But the $525 for last month's rent also should have been credited to them as well. The other mistake they made is the probate was wrong. That shouldn't even have been there because they never collected around that. So we ended up getting for our clients $717.50. Now, my clients are ecstatic because this is something that we could have just, they saw, they brought it to our attention because they're like, the tenant moved out and didn't pay last month's rent. And so then they called me and said, they didn't pay last month's rent because they said they already paid it. So then we go back and we're looking at this rental agreement. I'm like, oh, I see what happened. So we reached out to the other agent and we said, hey, listen, guys, can we get this resolved? The other agent was just unfortunately not very good to work with. Escrow, the officer had changed. That officer was no longer there. And so it was just, we don't have that file anymore. This was back in November. You should have called us. And I'm like, my client just called me in March. So because my client called me in March, this is when I can move forward with this. This was unfortunately your mistake. So we had emails back and forth. I talked to the escrow manager, and lo and behold, we were able to get that money returned to our client. But these small details are things that we need to look at as agents before months down the road. We need to go through and look, because it's escrow's job to do it right, but they make mistakes, we all do.
Yeah.
So when I get this settlement statement, it's like, okay, is everything right? So I want you to request, if you're not already doing this, request a settlement statement prior to closing. Because you're going to double check and make sure that everything is right. We've got Exhibit B. I want you to check out Exhibit B. This one here is not.
You have to request.
You have to request it.
But
And I've left off everybody's information on these. I've left off the escrow's information. I've left off, so we're not going to blow anybody under the bus here. Nah, we wouldn't do that.
and you left the name on there on page 1 of the cell, so I know who the escrow is.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, because you left it on the escrow.
Covered everything up.
Keys.
That's right.
On the escrow.
Oh, goodness gracious. I tried to cover everybody up. I'm sorry, but that's all right. So on B, we're on Exhibit B now. Exhibit B, I want to bring. This is a small one. So this is how I started paying attention to these details. And this is the first one that happened to me. Is in Exhibit B, you'll see that the buyer ended up paying for the pest control section 1. It's $380 on additional disbursement there. You see that? $380. Now, per the contract that's written there, if you see the contract that's written, it says that the buyer was going to pay for an inspection report. And then if you look at the work that was done, the total work to be done, inspection report was $95. $285 was the cost for the work to be done.
So they just grabbed the.
They just grabbed it, and I called that's what it says. What happened here? You made a snafu, and you charged my clients, which you shouldn't have charged them, right?
But on his actual contract, the buyer, well, on the contract itself, it says buyer will pay for the
inspection only.
For the report. It doesn't say any repairs. So the buyer was paying for the report. So the buyer paid the 95, but Escrow just saw this and threw 380.
I think the buyer was paying for the repair.
Was it on an RR then that the sellers were to pay for?
No, we never we discussed that they were going to take care of it. So hang on a second.
That's a good question.
Samantha, can you bring my Sharpie off my desk, please? Thank you. Yes. So that was never discussed. That we were going to have the buyer to pay for it. The seller should have been taking care of all of that per our conversations that we had. And I believe I have to go back and check. But the request for repair said that they were paid for it. Yes. The request for repair did say that they were going to pay for it, but somehow escrow sort of
they just got the full amount of 380.
Sort of missed that one there. Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Great point that you brought up, and that's one of our last pieces, of course, that we talk about in closing is a communication log. What's going on in this transaction? Understand, take your notes, because if you ever need to go back, what happened? There's a lot happening. When you get busy and you've got multiple transactions going on, sometimes you can kind of get them confused, which is which, and you don't want that to happen. Does that make sense? Matt is supposed to bring me my, yeah, because apparently it didn't cover up someone else's name. We don't want to cover it up. We don't want to put anybody else under the bus. We'll just cover it up.
Yeah, but it's on electronic now.
I just won't show it. I really, my goal is never to put anyone under the bus. This is all for training purposes. Because we all make mistakes. I've made my fair share of mistakes, but we learn from these mistakes and we're better for it. So this one here, I want you to take a look at this. Who's paying for all the cost here? All right, who's paying for all of the cost on that one there?
Let's see, it says buyer. The buyer says they're paying for so far.
Buyer's paying for everything there.
No, they're paying for everything. Right?
Yep.
I mean,
I'm just not gonna on the screen. I'm just gonna leave this alone. All right. So we looked at $700, right? We looked at a situation with $700. We looked at a situation where it was like $95 to one. The difference was, well, the $285 was the difference that was paid. Now we're looking at a situation where the total cost for this one is $3,000.
Yeah. So we're talking about county transfer taxes, buyer, city transfer taxes. So all these transfer taxes and things the buyers are going to pay. And if you look at something like this, you have, you know, you have prorations here, but then I don't see the transfer taxes. Oh, yeah, I can't scroll down on the screen.
Hey, you can't, because I took it off because it was giving away people.
Oh, okay. But so basically,
There it is.
The buyer says, oh, right. Well, the title, and then let's see, archive county transfer tax 335. So you got all those fees that are still being charged on the seller side, even though the buyer said they were paying for that. So that's a good catch.
Mm-hmm. So again, we looked at, someone says $285, $700, right? It's not that big a deal. $3,000. This is why we want to pay attention to these details every time, because most of the time, actually, let me think. The one with the rent, the buyer called me on that one. I didn't catch that one. Okay, the one with the termite, that's one I did see that one, and then the one for the 3,000, that one I did see. But if we miss that and our seller doesn't, or our client doesn't know that, and then later they find out, how do you look? But when you can call them and say, there's been a mistake, don't worry, we're getting it fixed. This amount of money is owed to you. How likely are you to get a referral? Because you're going to see, if you catch it, there's a mistake that was made. I'm going to help get this corrected to get you guys squared away. Because again, $285, okay, sure, that's fine. $700, sure. $3,000. Again, we're all human. And what I'm just trying to stress is that these details are critical for us to pay attention to when you go to wrap this up. So every time you're in a transaction, you're working with multiple different escrow companies. They all work differently, or some to a degree differently from one to the other one. Request a settlement statement prior to closing to make sure everything is in place as should be. All right? Because after you close, it took me 2 months to get one done, 4 or 5 months to get the other one done. Like, that's a lot of time. You don't get paid for that. All right, that's just separate time now that you're spending to get these things squared away. So fix it up front if you can. All right, by having that in front of you. As we're wrapping things up here, a couple things that I want to bring to your attention is when you go to leave the property. I didn't bring pictures of this one right here, but this is just another small detail. When turning over possession of a property, don't trust whoever's there that the home it can be turned over, that it's clean and ready to go. Okay? Client tells me I moved out, we're done. The buyer can move in. All right, fantastic. You guys, it's clean, it's good. The keys are in the box, go check it out. I get pictures of what the home looks like when they get there. Okay? It's just, everybody has a different idea of what clean is, okay? Your idea of clean should be some maids or someone came in and thoroughly, especially after we had COVID and everything going, came and really cleaned that home top to bottom. And there's nothing in the home that remains from those sellers. You as the agent, I would say, find yourself out there, pay someone to get it cleaned out. A small detail where I had one where I represented the buyer and I went there prior to, because I had the one where they sent me the pictures and I was like, okay, this won't happen again. So we closed on this one. This time I represented the buyer. I go in the house and I was like, food was in the refrigerator. I just was like, you can't be serious. So I called up my client, was like, don't worry, we'll get you possession tomorrow. I'm sending some maids in to get it cleaned up. So they never actually went to the house, okay? Sent the maids in, paid whatever had to be done to get it done. He went in, oh, it looks amazing, it's immaculate, it's great. Because when I went to the home, I was like, you can't be serious. This is how they left the home, right? Negotiate with the other side however you want to, but don't have your clients come into, they're buying a home. They're spending a lot of money. A lot of emotions are going into this, right? And so when they finally get those keys, they're so excited and then they can't move in because it's filthy and it's dirty. Again, small details, it may seem, but lasting impression on our clients for the work that we're doing. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So
I don't know if my clients do that topic, but I think also preparing the buyers for the fact that the seller's idea of clean and your idea of clean are not the same. You know, if you want to have your own house cleaner come in, you know, especially if possession is the day of and they're closing. Yeah. If the seller's moving truck happened to show up that morning and, you know, their last stuff's coming out at 3 and then the seller's taking or the buyer's taking possession 2 or 3 hours later, there may not be time for clean. So just kind of putting everyone in the same idea, just
same mindset.
in the same mindset, how clean it's going to be, or if they want to have a house cleaner the next day, or.
And those are the little details of the transaction, because I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had that happen where you close an escrow and then, oh man, they left all their stuff in the garage. They left all their stuff on the side of the house. They left trash bins full of stuff. I mean, if we ask around, I'm sure, Holden, I know it's happened to. Richard, I'm guessing it happened to you. Jennifer, same thing. That'd be myself. And sometimes you got to roll up the sleeves and go get it done, but just to save face and to get it out of the way. But they're supposed to leave the property free of any of their belongings prior to close of escrow or during possession. And sometimes it doesn't happen that way. Right. So you can get on the phone and argue all you want, or you can just, sometimes you got to go get it done yourself. I mean, it's unfortunate.
Story. I had a seller 2 or 3 years ago who was a divorce situation. He had 2 kids, and I kept checking in, and he said he was moving out. And it's like, okay, close of escrow is this date. They're, buyers are coming at this time. And I get a call from the agent who was showing up to, decorate the front door and get ready to give keys to the buyer. And my seller was still moving out. And when I mean still moving out, his garage was, he moved everything out of the house into the garage. So the garage was packed with stuff, and it wasn't packed in boxes. It was just stuff everywhere. And it took him another 48 hours to get out. And it was literally my husband and I helping him move. He was upset because he was trying to call movers to come. And of course, all of his friends bailed, and movers wouldn't come because it was last minute and everybody else was booked. And so kind of, I would say what I learned from that is checking in more with my sellers to really find out and make them truly understand what it means out, and they get overwhelmed and don't realize how much work they really have to do.
Any big items that they're leaving because it didn't fit on the truck or whatever, it's always good to call the buyers and say, hey, is it okay to leave this here, because they want to leave it for you. And see what they say. But if they're not, then it's our responsibility to get it out.
Yeah, you definitely want to shine bright for your clients as you should, by taking care of those small little things. Another thing that helps with that, I didn't mention this, is actually the verification of property. So no matter which side that you're on, because there's requests for repairs to go into a transaction as well. But that 5 days prior to close, going and checking to see how things are. Did my client actually start packing yet? You get there 5 days prior, like, we haven't started packing, it's gonna be going in 5 days. Like, what's going on here? That gives you an idea, because if we just like, well, they're taking care of it. I talked to them on the phone, they said it's gonna verify yourself. Okay, see with your own eyes, and that's gonna protect you to be able to communicate to the other side what's going on. Okay? So, any other questions, any other comments on what we've covered so far on these, what may seem like little details, but crucial points for our transaction?
Good stuff. Good here. Maybe ask the.
Everyone on the screen is very quiet except for well, she's gone now. I don't see Miss Rebecca on there. Very good. That's all we got for today, guys. Thanks for all of your input and sharing. I hope that all of us are better agents because of the time that we've spent here today.